And welcome to the Raleigh SEO Meetup. We've got a slide with all of our great sponsors that help keep this free. I was told to draw very good attention to them. They help pay for this room. We're going to be discussing this week Wikipedia for Business. Turn it up. Just a moment. Oh, you can't hear it in the room at all, can you? How about now? Can everybody in the back hear me good? All right. So we're going to be discussing Wikipedia for Business. First off, if everybody could really quickly stand up for just a moment if you've ever heard of Wikipedia. If you're still seated, I'd like to know who you are. Shout so that way I can shake your hand for not having heard of Wikipedia yet. I'm trying to find someone. All right, so everybody has heard of the site. So how can Wikipedia help you with SEO? Because that's what we're kind of interested in here. I decided to collect a whole bunch of links and point you out to a bunch of different sources. Kind of like the content at the end of the Wikipedia articles, links to all the different sources. So you can get listed in Wikipedia snippet in results. There's some folks desperately trying in these forums to figure out how to be able to make that happen. You can also get listed at the top of Google search results. There's several news articles where people have noticed that at the top of various terms, you'll have a little snippet of Wikipedia article. This is particularly good for company names. Type in a variety of different companies into Google, and you'll see along the right-hand side of the page a little snippet that comes directly off of their Wikipedia page. The results are also now prominently featuring nonprofit organizations. And I know we have some folks that are working on SEO for nonprofits, so making sure that those are updated, the Wikipedia pages are updated properly, is a good way to make sure that you're taking full advantage of that premium spot. And Google is not the only search engine doing this. There's even articles talking about how Bing is actually favoring Wikipedia even more than Google is. So in the snippet, everybody here is familiar with Google authorship. Is that correct? Yes? Good. So if you have Google authorship set up with your articles, you get your fancy little picture here and your name listed in the results page. And if you are connected to an organization, such as the Search Engine Roundtable here, it can pull a snippet about that organization right off of Wikipedia, as long as you have a Wikipedia article, and your organization has to be considered interesting, unique, relevant, whatever indefinite term you want to use. There's no way to know exactly what that means, but Google has to find it interesting enough to make that connection. But the first step is to actually have the page. Yes, sir. Google is recognizing, presumably, as we all know, Google doesn't tell us how any of this works. So, best guess, presumably Google is recognizing search or SER Roundtable there, and connecting that domain to a Wikipedia article, and correct. And it's on their domain. So those three things all come together and make this snippet happen. Yeah. So what is Wikipedia? It's a community-organized open encyclopedia. Before everybody tries to jot down all of this information real quick, towards the end, I have a link that's easy to jot down that will take you to this slideshow, which has all of these links for further reading. I mentioned that because the policies and guidelines for Wikipedia is rather long. We're not going to go into all of that. We're going to summarize a few things with it, but I wanted to include the links in case anybody did want to go through and try to read some of the details a little bit more closely. There's also a list of what Wikipedia is not. Some things I want to draw attention to real quick. It's not a dictionary. It's not a publisher of original thought. It is a tertiary source, which means that it points to other primary and secondary sources. Anything that's written in Wikipedia has to be backed up by a newspaper article or some other primary source that's been vetted in some way. A book, journal article, something of that nature. So if you just decide that you want to create a page for your company and you have no news media or anything like that to point to, it's going to more than likely be rejected pretty quickly. It's not a marketing tool, however there are ways that you can use it for marketing if you know how to work through the guidelines. And you can skim through more of those later if you want to follow that link. The 5 pillars of Wikipedia. Whoops. Let's go back to those. It is an encyclopedia. It has a neutral point of view. This is different from most of the content that you're going to be writing for any other source where you're going to be only saying good things about your organization. In Wikipedia, expect to find good and bad things. Even if you don't add the bad things yourself, it is a community-edited resource. Somebody else will probably come in there and go ahead and add the bad for you if you don't. That being said, if you don't want to get too much of the public eye, you may just not want to have a Wikipedia page to begin with. It is free content that anyone can edit, use, modify, and distribute. So whatever you put up on Wikipedia, expect other people to be able to repurpose that content however they see fit. That's part of what you're agreeing to when you hit that publish button. So anything that your company doesn't want out there for everyone to see and manipulate, this includes images that you put up on Wikipedia, you may want to think twice before you publish it out there. You need to treat other editors with respect. This becomes rather important for folks that are trying to do any kind of SEO with Wikipedia. The community is somewhat split, but there is a very strong number of folks in Wikipedia that will rebuttal any attempt for you to put your organization up onto Wikipedia. They'll say things like you're not a Fortune 500 company, or you're not a significant intellectual property holder in your space. However, there are a lot of examples that run counter to that. We're going to get into those later. You need to be able to put forth your view of why you belong on Wikipedia and stick with that neutral point of view that I mentioned in number 2, and the fact that it's an encyclopedia in number 1. If you can show a compelling reason for why your organization should be listed in an encyclopedia and how it is that the content that you're putting up comes from a neutral point of view and is not just marketing fluff, there's a good chance that you'll be able to stick in Wikipedia. Number 5, there are no firm rules. As I said, it's a good chance that you'll be able to stick. Just like you deal with haters in your comment section and everything else, you're going to deal with similar problems on the talk pages on Wikipedia and folks trying to reject your content. In some of the forums where people are fighting to get their organizations known on Wikipedia, a lot of them say that it's just not worth the hassle. So it depends on who you upset and how upset they get as to whether it becomes worth trying to get yourself listed in there. And if you look at the slides later, I've got more details for you there as well. So how do you get into Wikipedia? The organization must be notable. That's kind of the general consensus that you get out of the Wikipedia articles and the community. What exactly is notable? varies from person to person. So that becomes a little bit difficult. The first thing that you want to do is put together a list of your media coverage. So anytime that you can get your organization listed in the news, putting out press releases, some sort of articles on large primary and secondary source kind of websites. If you're linking to articles that were written by a ghostwriter and published on Billy Bob's blog, that's not going to cut it on Wikipedia. If you can get into the New York Times, that's doing pretty good. If you can get into the Raleigh News and Observer, that's a newspaper. That's an article that you can point to. It's a little bit easier to get into these local newspapers than it is to get into major national media outlets. So use them. You're trying to get local SEO in a lot of cases. If your Wikipedia article points to a lot of local news organizations and that is connected to your website, and Google is crawling through all this and not telling us exactly how they're putting it together, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you might be kind of local to Raleigh if all of your Wikipedia links are local news sources. So then you need to take the media coverage that you have and put together an article that is based only on the information in these published sources. If you know something that isn't in one of the published sources, you need to do your best to get it out there published in some way. Write a book about it, not a self-published ebook, but get a publisher if you can, publish something. If you can't go that far, put out press releases about it, try to get it picked up somewhere. As soon as you can get some sort of a relatively impartial news source, you can be able to include that information. And again, a link for more information on how Wikipedia handles organizations. So my favorite part, the examples. And towards the end, I'm going to have room for lots of questions if anybody has any. First example is the Cameron Village page. I tried to stick with good examples first and then bad examples second. So if we take a quick look at Cameron Village here, does everybody know where it's at? It's right around the corner in Raleigh. Towards the end here, you can see we have a lot of these blue links to the Fresh Market, Harris Teeter, Rite Aid, Ann Taylor, Chick-fil-A. If you have a business that is in Cameron Village, it might be a good idea to find a way to include your business listed in this article and then linked to an article about your business and start building that connection. Right? So Cameron Village is a place that is worthy of being in Wikipedia. This article has been around for a little while. On the talk pages here, you can see which projects this article belongs to. Actually, I skipped a little bit ahead of myself. Everybody's seen Wikipedia. Has anybody actually looked at the talk pages? That's something that most people don't even realize exists. On every single Wikipedia article, there's a talk page, and that's a little community forum, so to speak, where you can discuss anything that you're planning to add to this article. So before you go in there and just redo half of the article and upset someone and make an enemy for life on Wikipedia, it's a good idea to go into the talk page and mention, hey guys, I'm working on this section, I'd like some input, why don't you take a look at and point to another area where you're working on that article so that way they can give you some comments and some feedback. All right. Yes, sir. All right. Well, we're actually also streaming onto YouTube, so I'll repeat the question, but any other questions, if folks can come on up front to this mic and then ask it so everybody online can hear us as well. Basically, what was your name, sir? I'm sorry. Jason was asking about where you can create that content and link to people to take a look at what you're working on. So I'm going to log in here real quick and show you what that looks like on my account. When I'm logged into Wikipedia, along the top here, I have a sandbox. And in that area, I can create whatever articles I want. And these articles are public in the sense that anybody else on Wikipedia can see them and read them. However, they're not public in the sense that they will be crawled by a search engine or appear if you type in the search box on Wikipedia. You would have to go to my user account and to my specific sandbox. The reason I like to clarify that distinction is because anything you put in your sandbox is not going to show up in the search engines, but if somebody knows you, they are going to be able to read it, and it's kind of one of those weird semi-private public areas like Facebook where people think that they're posting a private message, but it turns out going to their boss when they called in sick and they're going to the beach, that kind of thing. Be careful what you put on here. It's kind of sort of public-private. Anything you publish in your sandbox can be viewed by anyone in the world. It just won't show up in Google. All right? And then you can link to any of these pages from the talk page on the page that you're thinking about editing. And you had a question. Did I answer it as well, or do you want to come up? Do you want to come up and ask real quick? Oh, sorry, I didn't turn it on yet. There's a switch on the top there.
There's a link someplace on that page that says talk.
So we're on Cameron Village, right?
Okay, there's talk. And then once you're on talk, there's a link that says sandbox?
No, the sandbox is when I'm logged in. Right now I'm logged into my Wikipedia account, and there's sandbox there. And that's my sort of private space on Wikipedia where I can create anything that I want. Private, public. Anybody can also look at it as well. All right. So the next one that I want to take a look at is City Market. Does everybody know where City Market is? Maybe even recognize it from the photo there. It's another little shopping center in downtown Raleigh. There's the GPS coordinates if you want to find it later. So in this article, you can see that it is considerably shorter than the Cameron Village article. Cameron Village was already a very short article in itself. This is barely even a paragraph. However, you have these red links. What these red links are is pages that have not yet been created in Wikipedia. So if anybody's working with the North Carolina Division of Archives and History, some other Wikipedian somewhere that created this page felt that it would be a good idea for the North Carolina Division of Archives and History to have their own page on Wikipedia. They just haven't gotten around to creating it yet. So you could go in there and create that for them. And you notice none of the businesses are listed here. So in Cameron Village, there were half a dozen or so businesses that are in that village that were listed with links. There are businesses in City Market, but none of them have pages. Each of them should go in, create a page, and find a way to tie into the City Market page. Come on up.
So just for a point of clarification, is it possible that they may have pages that haven't been kind of associated with this page yet, or is it that no one has linked them up or the correct references haven't been made?
I think the way that what you're getting at is that the businesses in City Market may already have pages on Wikipedia?
Possibly.
That is correct. They may be there and just not connected to this City Market page.
Okay, great.
So at the very least, they have a good opportunity for some interlinking, and setting up those cross links always helps. Local SEO, you got GPS coordinates on this page, and links to various businesses would very much help Google understand where those businesses are located and how they fit to the community.
Thank you.
So as a general principle, everybody here ought to examine their larger universe, the associations they belong to, the business groups, if they happen to be in an actual retail block or space or community. Because even if you're listed once, what you're saying is you could be cross-referenced over and over again as long as it continues to be relevant.
Correct. As long as it's relevant. If you go in there and you just start putting links on every possible little website that is remotely related to you, for example, the Raleigh City website, even though all these organizations exist within Raleigh, it's probably not a good idea and not very helpful to anyone to have a laundry list of all the possible organizations that exist within Raleigh. But a smaller area like City Market, where there's probably only a couple of dozen different businesses and organizations there, that could be a helpful resource, having a list of who's there. This particular market was founded in 1914, so they've got a few years of history as well. There might be some business in there that some famous person from way back when set up, or something interesting about the architecture there. Anything that you can tie into an encyclopedic reference. Simply existing there is borderline whether that's useful or not. That can be debated. But if you can tie into some other art and cultural history, that definitely warrants an article. So Wells Fargo Capital Center. This is another good example. Here we have, if anybody knows this, Argus Realty Investors LP, they could use an article. They're not, that page does not exist yet, and they apparently bought this building back in 2007. So that warrants them having an article. And there is a list of a couple of major tenants. Major is somewhat debatable. You know, where exactly do you draw the line on which one's a major tenant and which one's a minor tenant? So if you're one of the larger tenants there, or even mid-sized tenants there, you might be able to add yourself to that list and link to your page. The Bank of America Plaza, again, several articles that are missing. These are good opportunities for these organizations to go in and connect up with this page. And there's not a list of the businesses that are within this building. So that would be another little opportunity for those businesses, particularly the larger ones in the building, to say, major businesses here are X, Y, and Z, list them. The Raleigh Times building, that is another famous building in town. It's got a little bit of history tied to it. And there's even a mention, I'm not spotting it right off, but somewhere in this article it mentions that there's a bar that has opened up using the name, but it doesn't link to it. There it is. Converted into a bar. That's exactly what I was thinking, is they're mentioned in the article. I don't know who exactly wrote it, but I presume that they're not the ones that wrote it. So that would be a very nice link over to the Raleigh Times Bar. And they may even have some additional history, some photos. I mean, they've got the building there, and I know that they have it decorated well with all that. If they have any intellectual property rights to any of that information, posting that up on Wikipedia could start to build that archive about the Raleigh Times building and make a little bit stronger argument for why they should have an article of their own. User Voice, I know, is also housed in that same building, and this is that upstairs loft. That's what it looks like. So they could post current pictures of what the architecture looks like, since they're currently occupying it. And that would tie them in with the Raleigh Times building. A few more examples. I mentioned that even debatably insignificant Organizations have pages on Wikipedia. So caravan tours, anybody ever heard of them? Not particularly a world-renowned tour group or anything like that. However, they started in 1952, and they've got some sort of connection to a television journalist and such. They've got a small article, but down here in the notes section, they do have links to some additional information that is not only on their website. So this is not necessarily a good article, but it's an example of something that has stuck. If somebody did want to go in there and argue with them, though, they'd probably be kicked off pretty quick. So it is, at least in a couple of projects. That's kind of helpful. It's a low importance article. As you get to reading the talk pages a little bit more, you'll find that some articles actually belong to different Wikipedia projects. There are hundreds of them on a variety of different causes. If you can get your page picked up by one of these projects and they at least say that it's of low importance as opposed to no importance, that's better than being deleted. Here's another one, just a website, sportsbook.com. I apologize if this one belongs to anyone here. A relatively low importance kind of article, but it does exist, and they do have links out to Forbes and a couple of other miscellaneous sites. We'll take a quick look at the talk page as well. So it's a low importance article, and this start class means that it's such a short article that there's hardly anything of any significance there. It would be great if that was extended and a lot more links added. And now an example of something that is considered to be a relevant business, JetBlue Airlines. There is a ton of information here, lots of photos, and you notice each of these numbered footnotes here, links to sources. Down at the end, all the way down at the end, much longer than a paragraph. You have 109 different cited sources on this article. This is what the Wikipedia community is looking for, something that has a lot of information. Some of these are located on the JetBlue website, like this investor relations press releases page. However, it's a publicly traded company, and so things like their press releases and their annual profit report are considered primary sources. So if you're working with a publicly traded company and they're not currently on Wikipedia, a lot of their tax filing information that they have to put out anyway can be considered primary sources that can then be used to build an article. Now, how do we get around this idea? One of the key arguments that people bring up whenever you're trying to promote your own business on Wikipedia or trying to create a page for your own organization is that in the Wikipedia guidelines, these articles shouldn't be you should not edit articles about you, your business, or an organization that you're affiliated with. Keyword here being should not. That doesn't mean that you cannot. It's just kind of frowned upon. So if you are trying to foster a relationship with another organization, you might think about going in there and creating their Wikipedia page for them, because they really shouldn't be doing that for themselves, and that might help you to build a stronger relationship with them and start making friends with other businesses online. Similar to writing guest posts and things of that nature. You can use this to start greasing the wheels of communication. Also, you can engage with the community on the talk pages. So if you go to any article that is relevant to your business or your industry, you can start positioning yourself as a knowledgeable expert, where even though you're not the one making the edits to Wikipedia, you might go in there and be able to answer a question or two very easily that somebody else that's working on that page is dying to find resources for. You might be able to point them right to it. So you may not be able to cite your own, let's say you're working with some kind of a scientific organization. There's a lot of them here in Raleigh. You may not be able to cite your own articles and your own publications, but you could go to the topics that are relevant to your organization and refer the Wikipedia editors that are already working on it to look at the resources that you have made available. And through that, make yourself a knowledgeable expert and get those links into Wikipedia. You can also set up your own profile. On Wikipedia, if we go to myself here, there's my profile, which looks a little funny with the text in this resolution. I have a widescreen. And so you can create your own profile, link to your own website, talk about whatever it is that you're working on, and then whenever you're leaving comments in the talk pages, those are signed with your username, and people can go back to your profile and read about it. The information on your profile page doesn't typically show up in search engines, so I don't know if that's indexed at all. I know that it doesn't show up, so it probably will not help you with SEO ranking, but it might help you with building connections and getting other people to put in those links for you. If you want to take a look at all the links on this slideshow and review it later, the website address down at the bottom there, frankcjones.com/SEO Meetup, will take you to this exact set of slides with all those links for you. And that is what I have. So any other questions? No? None so far? They are probably around 30 seconds or so behind us. So they may have just gotten the call for questions. If anybody online wants to ask them also, we're watching for those. I'm sorry? Oh, no, you're not going to get a link out of Wikipedia to any content. They're all no-follow links on Wikipedia as far as trying to get any page rank help or anything like that. However, that being said, if you can get your organization to have a snippet that shows up at the top of Google, that can be kind of helpful. It may not go to a particular page that you're trying to drive traffic to for a landing page, but it might at least get your name in there. Come on down.
I was on Facebook the other night, and I saw in the feed someone who I know I don't follow had said to his followers, hey, can you get on Wikipedia? They're not allowing me to edit. There are some erroneous things there. I'm wondering if you can comment about that and what this particular person did. He's really well known in the remote viewing world. Now, there's some scientific things. I don't know if you know what remote viewing is, George Clooney, Goat Movie and all that, but there might be people out there who think that that's negative because they could see it as a spiritual context or something else in that nature. Do you think, one, that Wikipedia is truly neutral, and do you have any thoughts on how this man was prevented from editing his page? It would seem to me if someone put something about me that wasn't true and that I could back up, it would be kind of frustrating to have misinformation about there. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on that.
Okay. As far as if you have a personal page on Wikipedia and somebody is going in there and posting false information about you, you can go into the talk page, explain your situation. You can you can technically edit any page. You can do that either through your account or you can do it anonymously. You don't even have to log in. You can just go in there and make changes. Some pages, particularly for celebrities and political issues that are extremely contentious, are protected pages. Anyone can still make an edit, but there is a review process that goes through, so that way it's not live edits like it is on most pages. So depending on who this person is, if they have enough fame and notoriety, they may be able to petition Wikipedia to try to get that page locked. Most people, that is not going to happen. You have to be extremely popular. For example, a contentious subject like abortion, that page is locked. You're going to have to go through a lot of process to make any changes. That being said, depending on what they're saying about this person, and I don't know the exact comments, if they can back it up, and if they can say something like, for example, in the New York Times, XYZ happened, that's a statement of fact. You can go and look at the New York Times and see if whatever was said in that article. So while you may not like what was said, the fact is that it was said in that article, and that is relevant for Wikipedia. If they're just saying, I don't believe in this, that's a statement of someone's opinions. And theoretically, on Wikipedia, nobody cares about your opinions. Also, that being said, it is a publicly edited encyclopedia. So just because everyone would prefer to see no opinions and just a discussion of facts doesn't mean nobody ever puts that in there. If you can show this is this person's opinion, they can't back it up with any kind of facts, then you can continue to argue that in the talk pages and get someone to override those changes. That process may or may not be worth your time, though, depending on what it is that's being said. Any other questions?
Are there Wikipedia police?
To some extent, the question was if there are Wikipedia police, and to some extent there are. There is first line of defense, if you will. There are bots that constantly scan Wikipedia and look for spam. And so people will go in there all day, all night, around the world. Anybody can edit it, even anonymously. And these bots will try to pick out what the spam changes are and automatically revert it back to the previous version. One of the cool things about Wikipedia is that it is able to be reverted back at any time. All of the previous changes are stored. So if somebody goes in and defaces a page, if it's a bot that's finding it, it can be just a few milliseconds and it's put right back. If that happens too often, then the pages become locked, and so then there's that human intervention and a little bit lengthier review process. Anything else? Yes, in the back. If you want to come up as well, so that way we can get both the questions lined up. Come on up. Yeah, whoever wants to go first.
Say you want to create a page about some entity, and it would seem you're going to go in and create a profile for yourself, and then start from there. Is that correct?
Technically, you can edit anonymously, so you could go in and just make the changes. However, you have a really high likelihood of somebody rejecting your changes if you do that because it looks very spammy. Mm-hmm. So the best bet to make your changes stick is to first go in and create a profile, so that way you have a existing user account, and then copy the page that you're wanting to change, put that into your sandbox, make your changes there, and then go back to the talk page for the article that you're wanting to change and say, hey guys, I'm working on changes here. Here's the link to my sandbox. Let me know what you think. I'm going to publish these changes, let's say, in 2 weeks. That way they have enough time to review it and make their comments. Nobody says anything in 2 weeks. Go ahead and make your changes. More than likely, nobody cares. Or they agree with your changes and they're okay with that. If somebody doesn't like your changes, they'll usually come over to your talk page and tell you why, and then you can start addressing those concerns.
Now, what if you want to create a page from scratch?
If you're wanting to create a page from scratch, it's also a good idea to create a user account and then create that page in your sandbox, so that way you can go through all of the editing and revisions that you want. Once you have everything laid out the way that you want it, go ahead and submit that page. That goes through a slightly different review process. First, bots look at it, and if it looks good, it'll usually just get published. If it looks a little spammy, then human eyes will usually look at it and decide whether or not it's going to get booted off. That's why it's a really good idea to lay everything out in your sandbox first, so you're not just submitting one paragraph or something like that. It's really a good idea to have 1,000 words, maybe even a couple of thousand would be nice. If you can't say that much about your organization, do you really need a page? That's sort of, it's a gray line. It's a very adjustable line. I have submitted articles that only had a few hundred words because the topic I was researching, most of the content was in another language, and I didn't have access to that. But I was able to provide some access to what I could understand in English, and it was only a couple paragraphs long, and it got published. So usually you want to hit about 1,000 words or better to give yourself a good shot of sticking around.
So we saw how for brick and mortar businesses, like you show, we can connect to other pages and we can start from there promoting or creating a page for our brick and mortar business. But let's say we're building a website that has no history, has no presence anywhere. How can you take advantage of Wikipedia to start promoting or creating a presence for the business?
Well, your business may not have a physical brick and mortar presence, but each of your employees or owners has some kind of physical presence in a community somewhere. And so if you can start finding ways to connect with your community, volunteer at different organizations and such, I don't know, make some kind of donations, or come up with some really good intellectual property that's worthy of being written up in the press. The biggest thing that you need is to have some kind of primary and secondary sources that you can refer to. And then you can discuss your business and what it is that you do. The thing that you need is those primary and secondary sources to point to. Getting in the news, getting journal articles published in peer-reviewed journals. It depends on what your exact business model is.
How do you guys validate dead links in your reference section? And can that be used, repurposed? A dead link appears, and you can go back and see what the content is, and it's tied to a topic that you're working on or have a project on, and you can update it or repurpose it or so.
Okay, so if you've got a Wikipedia article that has a dead link in it, and you may have another resource.
Updated information or another resource.
Okay. As far as I'm aware on dead links, I'm sure that there are bots that go through and find those and remove them. I don't know of any list that has just these are all the dead links that have been found today.
Right.
That may exist, but I'm not familiar with it. I would Google that.
Okay. All right. All right. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. And then also, as far as getting your link in there to replace the dead link, that other half of the question, that can be considered spammy. It depends on how you approach it. That is why I recommended going through the talk pages and being the knowledgeable expert. So that way you're providing a link to a resource and another Wikipedia editor comes in and finds that link, and they're left with two choices. A, research the heck out of it and find something better, or B, thank you for the resource you just gave them and stick it in the article, which more than likely they're going to do. So that essentially gets you through that hurdle without having to come across being kind of spammy. Yes, sir.
You've talked about businesses. Can you talk about people? You have bloggers, you have notable people, public personas, politicians, artists, something.
This is another one of those difficult questions to answer as far as being notable. I find it really difficult to tell an individual person, I'm sorry, sir, you're not notable. That just seems offensive to me. However, on Wikipedia, you will find a lot of people that feel that you are not notable. So it's a difficult area to tiptoe around. The way I would approach it is, let's say I was really wanting to get a guest post in on some A-list blogger's website, and they're not on Wikipedia yet. I would take the time to create their Wikipedia page for them as a fan, and then I would say, hey, I've created this Wikipedia page for you. I love your work. And then maybe a week later, hey, I've got a guest post that I'd like to have on your website now that they know your name and they're, kind of owe you one. That might be a good way to get in there. As far as creating your own personal page, I also have a difficult time there as well, because I would have a hard time talking about myself in a way that would be an encyclopedia reference. I don't know that I've done anything that would be worthy of, even being a footnote in history, let alone a whole page on an encyclopedia. So maybe if you're Obama or something, you could maybe write your own Wikipedia page, but by then you got somebody doing that for you. Did that kind of sort of answer the question?
It's more like I work for people who are on the brink that block and
Nah.
popular and elsewhere outside of the block.
That falls along the lines of where you shouldn't edit a page that you're affiliated with. So for an organization that you're affiliated with, keyword being shouldn't. However, if you're going to do that, you do need to back it up with a long list of primary and secondary sources. So if these people have a lot of news coverage, that's why I recommend first step is start collecting all those links. I've come across several groups and organizations that I say, okay, we're going to create a Wikipedia page for you. Where is your list of all of your news coverage? And they're like, I don't know, Google us. That doesn't help me. Start collecting that list as soon as possible. Anytime that you get mentioned in the news, grab that link, add it to a list somewhere, and then eventually you'll have a long enough list of links that you can put together a Wikipedia page. If you can find those links for those people, and not just links off of them and their friends' blogs, it has to be high-quality primary and secondary sources. They may have been interviewed on television. If you can point to that episode where they were interviewed. Yeah. Published author on Amazon is a little bit questionable. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's terrible. I mean, I'm not published on Amazon, and I would love to be. But anybody can technically be published on Amazon, so maybe if they can back that up with some sales, yeah, which I presume that they can. But I just want to be clear about, yeah, if they get enough people to buy their stuff that they can be a bestseller, technically bestseller is notable. That's where I get into debating, what exactly is notable. Just because you had enough sales to be a bestseller doesn't necessarily mean that your ideas were worth paying for. You just might have bought enough copies of your own book. So, but technically, if you can get on a bestseller list or something, that's a thing that is worth discussing. So it's a very gray area. Does that make it a little bit more clear, though? Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Any of them from the YouTube community watching? No? All right. Either we have no YouTube comments or we're not seeing them. Either way, I think we're going to wrap this thing up.